They found it funny that I was in there for magic mushrooms. It was a bit of a novelty.
You made a comment, some days weren't too bad, and for a COVID lockdown, it wasn't a bad place to be.
Pressure's off you in many ways because you don't have to worry about rent, you don't have to worry about paying for food, or your only job is to survive. What did you always want to do with your life? And somehow I knew the answer in my gut straight away. It was stand-up comedy.
Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with former PR young gun, restaurant owner, drug dealer, former prisoner, and now stand-up comedian, Andrew Hamilton.
Hello, Gary.
It's good to have you back, Andrew.
Yes.
If you meet someone, how do you introduce yourself? Quite often the question comes out, and what do you do?
I just say I'm a stand-up comedian.
Right. Okay.
I think that's the thing which is the thing that I do the most, that I'm hugely passionate about, that is part of my identity now is comedy. So yeah, that's how I introduce myself first and foremost. I don't say, former drug dealer, Andrew Hamilton, but people, I'm finding because of social media, the people on the street are stopping me more and more, recognizing me. And so it's interesting, like seeing where people recognize me from. They'll either be like, are you that TikTok guy? Or I had someone actually recognize me from my podcast the other day, and I was like, at least that's positive. You know?
Well, that's good. I don't know if you know my story, but I was a policeman for a long time, then fell out with the organisation, left in controversial circumstances, end up with criminal charges and convictions.
Yes.
And I sort of lost my, when I say lost my way, I lost my identity, and people would go, and what do you do?
What would you say?
Well, that's what confused the fuck out of me. I'd go, well, I used to be a policeman. Now I'm not. And if I feel like I bypass it and go, I do podcasts or I work in the media now, I feel like I'm cheating the person by not telling them
the full story.
The full story. So it's almost like, look, he's just brushing that aside. So I'm a bit tongue-tied. Now I'm comfortable because I've been doing it for 3 years, saying I do podcasts and work in the media. But in that changeover period, I didn't know what to say. I'm a cop, I'm a crook, and I'm doing stuff, Yeah. What do you say?
I find if I say to someone that I'm a comedian, then the story quickly unravels to the rest of it, because if they say, what do you talk about on stage? I say, well, I was in prison for a few months, and most of my jokes are about that at the moment. Then that just always leads to more questions.
And then someone's, what were you in prison for?
Yeah.
Because I imagine that would get asked. That's the obvious question. I was in prison. What for? Okay, well, look, we left you in part 1. You'd been pinned down on the ground in your bedroom floor after hiding behind the door, which it didn't work. There's a cut. Still
can't believe it didn't work.
Jesus, master criminal. And with some very serious police that didn't smile, and they said a couple of things that, were a little bit offensive and probably inappropriate to you. But anyway, we've got past that.
Yep.
You've gone to the SPC, which is the Sydney Police Centre, Surrey Hills Police Station, and held in the cells there, and you've been transferred to Parklea Prison.
That's right.
Now, I'm thinking, and you go in the prison van?
Yep.
That's, to me, and I'll say it, I think that's fairly intense. You're shuffled into the back of the van. You don't know what the other prisoners have done, and you've locked there, and you've been driven to the big house.
Yep.
What was going through your mind?
I mean, I got lucky in that the guy who was in my container on the truck with me was also going to prison for the first time.
Yep.
He was a Kiwi bloke named Clark, and we got along really well and started chatting, so that that kind of made things a bit easier, that trip to Parklea. I remember the drivers of the truck go around these like lights at like breakneck speed, and you think they must be trying to fuck with you because
you're bouncing around.
Yeah, bouncing around the back of the truck. But and there was a woman in the container in front of us, right before we took off, and she's like, "Who's there?" And we introduced ourselves, and
sorry, just run. Who's there? Hi, it's Andrew.
Yeah. And she goes, "What are you guys into?" And I said, "I don't know, chicks and beer." And she goes, "Don't tell me I'm here with two straighty 180s." And I was like,
Oh, she spotted you.
I never thought I could be on the way to prison still being accused of being boring and vanilla.
But so to me that right, two straighties, first timers,
Yeah,
newbies.
yeah. And so she's like, "I've got some H if you want some." She had heroin smuggled inside her.
Yeah.
And so I have a joke on stage I say that I've never done heroin before, but if I was ever going to, I think Cheryl's vagina heroin on the way to prison would have been the time to start, because at least then when I'm doing rehab, talking about the first time I did heroin, people would be like, fair enough. But it was so funny because like we were in separate containers, like we couldn't even reach each other, and this woman was offering us heroin.
It's a different world.
It was a different world,
different world. But it's It's you said it was a good thing having your mate that hadn't been there before.
Yeah.
But what would be running through my mind is this bloke just setting me up? I would be hyper alert, paranoid.
I wasn't paranoid. Nah. I got a good read on him. He seemed genuine, and we ended up being cellmates in like four different prison wings, and we were really tight.
Okay.
Clark and I. But so we both arrived there together late at night, and then had to just suss it all out together.
Okay, talk us through that, because we all see the prison movies and the van comes in, and then what happens?
You get off the truck, and then they asked me what my MIN number was, and I had no fucking idea what my MIN number was.
Yep.
So they're like, "What's your name?" I was like, "Hamilton." So then you go in and you got to strip naked, and they give you clothes, and none of my clothes that they gave me fit, including the shoes. I'm size 11. They gave me like these size 14 clown shoes. And I was like, these shoes don't fit. And they're like, figure it out later. Like, they don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
And all the clothes, like the pants and all this stuff, were like triple, quadruple XL. They were just like, it was just ridiculous. All these clothes were not appropriate. And they don't care. It's just like move along. So you go through the scanner just in case you've got anything, smuggled up your ass or whatever. And then you're allowed to make a phone call, and you're allowed to add people's numbers to your dialing list. But I didn't know that you had to add in your area code 02.
Yeah.
So I just put in my parents' home number, and it took me weeks to realise that I'd fucked it up by not putting the area code in. So I was just calling a number that was just ringing out somewhere. And my parents thought I was, just refusing to try and contact them. So that caused stress.
Little things like that.
There's little things like that cause stress when you can't call anyone, you can't reach anyone. So got taken over to our cells in the quarantine wing at Parklea. And
so did you walk like you see on the prison movies? You're walking carrying your blanket,
you got a bag. Yeah, you got a bag full of all your stuff.
And were the other prisoners scraping along yelling at you?
Nah, because it was late at night, so everyone was already locked away.
Right.
So the only guys you're interacting with are the other guys who had just arrived there and were being introduced to their cells in quarantine for the first time.
Yeah.
And so I just got put into a cell with some young bloke whose name I can't remember, but I was pretty exhausted still from the fact that I hadn't slept in a few days, and so I remember just falling asleep pretty quickly, I think, and waking up the next day, and that's my new life. I'm in a cell and I'm in quarantine, and you're stuck in there for the first 3 days without leaving it.
Was that because of COVID? Or
because of COVID? Yeah.
Okay, and describe the cell.
I mean, there's 2 small single beds touching each wall. There's it's all made of just hard.
Everything
concrete.
About jail is hard, isn't it? The metal, the concrete.
You've got these small little shelving bit. You've got a small shower that I think gives you hot water for about 6 minutes before it cuts off. The cell door has kind of like a small window that was closed up, and then a small kind of gap where they can open it up to give you food and that kind of stuff. But it's small and very basic.
Toilet in it,
and a toilet which has got this steel toilet. No toilet seat, obviously, just like a steel toilet that's got like a bubbler connected to it. For water, for you to drink water and brush your teeth, and that's it really.
So what's the conversation like when you walk in and you're about to be locked in a room with someone you've never met that's in there for who knows what.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just got chucked in the cell and met him and said good day, and then I think that first night I was fucked. I just went straight to sleep.
Yeah.
But the next day, you're stuck in the cell all day, so we chatted for a bit. But yeah, he was in there for something stupid, like he was in there for a breach of AVO, and then he got out and texted the chick as soon as he got out and got sent back
straight back in.
Yeah, so I was just like an idiot. But yeah, it's the first 3 days I just tried to sleep because I mean there was nothing to do. There was no TV in the cell at that point. I know some guys, particularly if they're well connected, get a TV straight away, but I didn't know anyone, so I had no TV, no books, nothing. It was just
you'd be very much in your headspace, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to sleep as much as possible, because when I was awake, I wasn't in a very good place. I was just stuck in my own thoughts, and that was the last place I wanted to be. So I just tried to sleep, which was the only solution I had, really.
Yeah. So 3 days in isolation, and that was just to clear you from COVID, or
that was
whatever.
Pending a COVID test, and then after that, you get upgraded to being allowed out of your cell for like 45 minutes a day.
Okay.
The rest of the time, it's basically the same as before, but you're allowed out of your cell to exercise, make phone calls. But as I said, at that time I'd fucked up my phone list, so the only person I could call was my ex, and then she had to relay information to everyone else who were wondering why I wasn't calling them. And then you could interact with other inmates who were all at different stages of their quarantine. I try to explain to the prison guards that defeated the whole purpose of quarantine. If everyone's at different stages, and someone comes in and they're contagious,
did they appreciate you telling them how to run their jail after 2 days?
No, absolutely not.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
Did you decide to give advice to other prisoners as well?
just to the screws, and they were not interested at all in having a guy in green telling a guy in blue
must have
how to
come
do
as
it.
a surprise to
6 weeks later, Parklea Prison had the biggest COVID outbreak in the entire country. But
only they listened.
If only they listened. I did write a letter to the governor about my views on COVID in Parklea, but that was enough, I think, for me to get sent to another prison. So you're in there, and then you just interact with the guys.
So you didn't make friends with corrective services officers?
Not straight away. No.
How was your first day in the playground?
It was fine.
Yeah.
I got along with plenty of the other fellas. They found it funny that I was in there for magic mushrooms. It was a bit of a novelty.
I was going to say, was it the novelty, the fact that mushrooms?
Yeah, guys would laugh at me.
Were they laughing at you or with you?
Bit of both. I remember one guy who was in there for a couple of kilos of coke saying to me, mate, the cops will give you the mushrooms back when you get out. Like, that's how much it's a non-crime. So, yeah, it was fine. Clark, who I'd been on that truck with, was there, and we hung out pretty closely and chatted with other blokes. You kind of gravitate towards other blokes that seem to be a good fit personality-wise with you, and so I had a fine time. It wasn't until I remember State of Origin was on one night, and I didn't have a TV still for the first 10 days. I didn't have a TV, but I could hear the game, and I could hear other prison wings. I could hear guys shouting, and that made me think like that's the noise and the chaos that I'm going to be confronted with soon when I get out of quarantine, because quarantine's like a bubble. It's not it's not real jail. It's not.
Well, it's probably, with the hindsight, it's a good way to be introduced. You had your little safe place to go back to.
Yeah, exactly. You just you get to know a couple of fellas well to start with, and it was very boring and hard because I had nothing to read or watch all day. So but then after about 10 days, I got a TV, and you're like, wow, that's such a game changer, just in terms of just keeping your mind distracted.
Yep.
And that's why I started, when I got a pen and pencil after about 6 days, that's when I started writing my prison food reviews, just because I was like, I need...
Because you're an ex-restaurateur.
Ex-restaurateur, but I just needed something to amuse myself and also just distract me from my surroundings. So I thought... Writing kind of tongue-in-cheek reviews of prison lunches and dinners is something which I will enjoy doing. So I started doing it, and I kept it up the entire time I was locked up.
And that's and we'll talk more of your prison time, but you've got onto that, and I think it's a classic, because when you did get out and you started TikToking about your rating of your prison meals, each meal.
Yeah.
And it's not a long list. So I'm going to read it out because and this is the ratings. You gave them a score. So we'll start at the top 10. Not possible, as in it was just brilliant.
There was no way there was ever going to be a 10 in prison, you know?
Okay, 9, as good as mum's cooking.
Yep.
So that got a tick. 8 was you'd be happy to pay for it.
Yep.
Okay, so 7, one of the better days in prison.
Surprisingly, quite a lot of them were about a 7, you know? Like
what sort of meal are we looking at?
Oh, like just like a decent wrap, you know, just something that's like, you can't fuck up. Like it's hard to fuck up a sandwich or a wrap, you know, something like that, or even like a meat pie, something like that. There was once I got into like mainstream prison wings and you were able to heat things, that drastically improved things. Like if you get a pizza salad pack and it comes with like a tortilla and some pepperoni and cheese, if you put that through a toaster a couple of times, you can heat it up.
Right.
Suddenly that's a reasonable meal.
That's gold.
Yeah.
Okay. 6, you know, it's really not terrible. 5, you can stomach it without much regret. 4, definitely one of the darker days. Give us a 4. What's your typical 4 meal?
Oh, there was, what were some of the badder ones? Like, a frittata. We called them fartatas because, you know, 2 guys in a cell that are both eating like a really eggy frittata.
Doesn't make it very comfortable.
It's going to make it a pretty smelly cell later in the day. Yeah. But no, the vegetarian frittatas. The guys, there were some meals the guys would trade or give away, but like there were ones that they couldn't give away because they sucked so much. And I'm pretty sure the frittatas were one of them.
Okay. I like this one because I can just see the look on your face when you write it down. Oh, that's right. I'm in prison.
Yeah.
When you were complaining about your meal, I forgot, damn it.
Yeah. Just to remind you, like, no, it's not supposed to be gourmet cooking.
Okay, we're getting down the bottom now. Number 2 is almost inedible, but you have got to survive. So sometimes you just got to do what you got to do.
That's right, particularly before I got introduced to buy-ups and you could buy extra food. Literally all you can survive on is the prison food they're giving you. Yeah. So it's either that or the half loaves of bread that they're giving you. You've got to eat something and a few pieces of fruit. You're like, this is all I have, so I got to eat something.
Okay. Right. 1 is this is tough even for jail.
Yeah.
And when it gets down to 0, the 0 rating would rather starve. Fuck that. I'm not eating it.
Yeah.
Right.
So there was, I think there was the lowest I can remember is I think I got served it by mistake. It was like, I think it was like a halal meat. It was called religious beef salad. And it was just this grey-looking cuts of meat that looked like they came from a very sad cow. And I remember just trying to take a bite of it and just being like, "Fuck,
couldn't
I
stomach
can't."
it.
Yeah, nah. So I think I just had whatever the salad was that came with it, and a couple of pieces of bread, and just thought that'll do for tonight.
And when you did post this jail prison meal review, it sort of went off, didn't it?
It did. I mean, everyone, a lot of guys that have done time had their own thoughts. Some people thought I gave too many things decent scores, but I actually thought on the whole, most of the food was half decent. You know, most of the meals hovered around somewhere between a 5.5 and a 7.5. Which is enough
you were being fair.
Yeah, absolutely. But I even had people message me saying that they've got loved ones that are locked up, and the food reviews brings them a bit closer to them because they can see, what they go through. I think the other thing people liked was that I sometimes with the food reviews I'd add context of like what happened that day. Yeah. Because obviously the mindset you're in affects your enjoyment of food.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So there was one which I think a lot of people found like funny but also morbid, where I say that today my ex-fiance told me that she no longer wants to be with me and that she's rehomed my dogs. And this has affected my enjoyment of the sandwich, 4.2. So it was like a corned beef sandwich. So, I added some little things like that because, it's you don't just eat food in a vacuum. It's like, you're in prison. Like, what's the shit that has happened that day? Because, sometimes if you've exercised and you've got some sun, you've had a few laughs, and you're in a good mood, suddenly that the food also tastes better because you've had a decent day.
Life's pretty good. Yeah. I understand. And I've heard you talk about prison that you made a comment. Some days weren't too bad, and for a COVID lockdown, it wasn't a bad place to be. We got to play touch football, and you could lay out in the sun.
Yeah. I think that's something that I found was that my life was such a mess, and I just felt like I was under so much financial pressure, and also just like a drug addict and a gambling addict, that in prison, I mean, the pressure's off you in many ways, because you don't have to worry about rent, you don't have to worry about paying for food, or your only job is to survive.
That's interesting you say that, and I do understand it because I've heard so many people say it. Like, it's easier in there. The chaos that's out there, at least we know what's happening here.
I think prison is obviously, there's a lot of guys that have horror stories, but I found prison to be easier than real life. In real life,
Yeah.
the pressure's on. You've got to find a way to survive, to pay rent, get a job, keep a roof over your head, feed yourself, all these kind of things. And so I just found life simpler in prison.
Are you a better person for it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for many ways. I mean, firstly, I've been drug free nearly for 2 years now, and I like the man that I see in the mirror again. I didn't for a long time.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm doing good things with my life that are worthwhile. And I love my life now. But
Yeah.
it wouldn't have happened if I didn't get locked up. But in terms of my time in there, yeah, I know that there's a lot of guys that have horror stories, and it sounds like for a lot of people it's a case of just it's a matter of time. That didn't happen to me. I was in there for 4 months, and in that time I exercised, I had a laugh with guys. I found a lot of guys in prison are not evil people. They're just lost souls that have
Yeah.
made mistakes. And so I got treated very well. And yeah, so I would exercise, play touch footy, get sun. I'd get locked away and watch game shows with my cellmates and watch movies, and
Yeah.
and just started to think about what kind of person I wanted to be when I got out. And I promised myself that when I got out, I'd do something different with my life.
That's when the system's working, isn't it? When that is you're being punished. The punishment is your liberty's been taken away, but you've gone in there, you've come out, it hasn't traumatised you, it made you reflect on your life, and you've come out a better person than when you went in. So that's when the system's actually working. The judge, and I kept some comments that the judge made. That this is Judge Scotting noted, Hamilton has turned his life around since the police raid, testing negative for drugs in every urine sample since. He's highly engaged in his rehabilitation. So what you've just telling us there is you're not paying a slip service. The judge recognised that.
Yeah.
with your sentencing.
I think it's a lot easier. I realised that I came from a place of privilege in that I had friends and family that were supporting me through my time, and then when I got out, I got offered a job within 5 days of getting out when I was still under house arrest. And so you see so many guys in there where we talked about guys where the writing was all on the wall. They were always going to go to prison because they came from these, underprivileged backgrounds. And a lot of these guys, I mean, you see in every prison wing I was in, 30% of them are Kooris, and you think these guys, when they get out, they don't have support networks. They're not getting offered jobs. And they feel isolated and unsupported. And the only people they identify with when they get out are other guys who have been to prison. And so it's very easy for these guys to continue a cycle, right? So I know how lucky I was to have that support, and that has been instrumental in me being able to reinvent myself and change my life. And I think that more needs to be looked at in terms of ways to support guys when they get out, because you see every prison wing I was in, I was a rarity being a first time in there, particularly Long Bay. I think in a yard of 80 guys, I think 2 of us were in there for the first time.
It's ridiculous. The
Everyone else-
recidivism, isn't it? With going to prison and the likelihood of you coming back. But breaking that cycle, and I think you've identified a key point, and all the people that we speak to that have gone down the wrong path and we've spoken to on the podcast and people I've seen through life, that if you got that support mechanism, world of difference.
Yep.
You walk out and you've got something, you can aim for something, you know what you're doing. Having said that, you're probably underplaying your role in it too. You could have still just been a fuckwit and gone down the wrong path again, taken the easy path. So you would have had to do a bit of work to turn your life around.
I say that, when some people talk about an out-of-body experience. This was like an out-of-life experience for me. I got to sit on the sidelines of my own life in prison and just think, where did it all go wrong? And like, what if I could start over, what would I do differently?
Yeah.
And it was during that moment that I was able to ask myself the hard question of, like, what did you always want to do with your life? And somehow I knew the answer in my gut straight away. It was stand-up comedy. I somehow that just came just booming out of somewhere in me. It was like, you wanted to do stand-up comedy. And so I had this thought where I thought, what if it's so insane, this idea, but what if I just get out and start owning my time in prison? What if I just start owning my mistake on stage and talking about it all the time and making jokes about it? What if, because I could have just got out and tried to hide it and just get another
sweep it away. I'm not that person anymore.
Try and get a white collar job, because I mean, not everyone you meet knows that I went to prison. I mean, it was in the news, but it was in the Daily Mail. Who the fuck reads that? I could have tried to sweep it under the rug, but I thought, what if I go in? Like, it's an insane thought, but what if I go in the opposite direction and just own the fuck out of it? And just do this, and it seemed in my head like such an insane idea that it might work.
Yeah, well, you came up with the doggy pizzas, so anything. Maybe this is the benefits of mushrooms. Who knows?
It just seemed like such a crazy idea. I thought, what if I just go out and so
just when you're in prison, you didn't try it on, did you? Being a smart ass in prison?
Not at all. No, people have asked me that before, and no, you don't try and be much of a comedian in prison, because if it doesn't work, things can get dangerous very quickly, right?
Yeah.
So you have a laugh with other guys, but you don't try and be like the comedian of any prison wing, because that's a dangerous game.
Yeah. Okay, that wasn't funny, Andrew. You've gone too far.
Yeah. What'd you say, you dog? Yeah.
You got out and talking about, you didn't hide your experiences, because I think some of your observations of prison, and I could be wrong, but I think you posted this, with inmate induction and orientation booklet, which has some interesting advice.
Yeah, I think there was one thing about not sharing needles. There was some stuff about the best way to. There's one that said or shelve drugs, shove them up your ass.
Yeah.
And then there was one about use condoms for sex, and you're like, oh, fuck.
You're at Park Lee. I think it's all male prisoners and 1,300 prisoners or whatever. Max.
Yeah. They had, in one prison wing, they had a condom dispenser, and you're like, fuck, all right. But, it was weird. When I posted about that, the Parkley Prison tried to backtrack and deny that they'd ever made it. They were like, "Oh no, this is something that he's made," which was bullshit.
I saw online that they'd given the response to it and an explanation that it's better for prisoners. Blah blah blah. The drug advice was preference, if you're going to use drugs, to smoke, shelve, which is, as you talked about, and swallow or snort drugs, but don't inject.
Yeah, and I think that's actually good advice.
Yeah,
right?
It's not something to shy away from.
No, I think that's good advice that they provided, because they're like they're accepting the realities of the world that that they're in, right? But that's why it was weird when I heard that the Daily Mail had contacted them and they had tried to deny the existence of that document. I was like, I didn't make this up and print it. Like, this is one thing I got from jail. Weird.
The fact that you're talking about, what's the sort of response now when you're out of jail with people that have been in jail and other people? Are people seeing the funny side of it, or people understanding what you're doing, talking about it?
I thought that when I got up on stage and started talking about my time in prison, the people were going to boo me and hate what I was doing. But I've done nearly over 300 gigs now, and it's never happened once. People realise that my humour is largely self-deprecating, and they also find it interesting. It's a world that they don't know anything about, and people also like the fact that I'm doing comedy instead of continuing to be a criminal.
Well, it's a positive thing, isn't it? So it has to be a positive thing.
People often say, good on you, mate. Good on you for doing something else with your life. So people, I think, see the positive in it. And there's just so many comedians talking about the same old shit that I think people find it refreshing.
Well, you're giving an insight, and what I see is you're giving us an insider's look in prison from someone that was inside, but it's almost an outsider because you've stepped in there, had a look, and 4 months you spent in there. Let's take you back in there for a sec. Sorry, because we've moved on, but
That's
I'm
okay.
dragging you straight back to prison. You're in before you're classified. You're like you'd be mixing with maximum and minimum security. If it's a Class A drug, commercial quantity, I would imagine they put you in there with the heavy hitters.
I was in A Class O the whole time I was in. So at Parkley and also at Long Bay, I was on an A classification. So I was in. I think at Long Bay in my yard of 80 blokes, there would have been like 25 that were in there for murder.
Yeah.
We're in there. But then you'd also have guys that were in there for like driving while disqualified, And I was like, "What the fuck are you doing in prison?" I'd be like, "Oh, it was my 11th time."
Didn't learn after the night.
You're like, fair enough. The judge must be like, "Mate, I don't know what else to do with you.
Give you one more chance."
Yeah,
I said that 10 times ago. Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, it's bad. You're mixing with some pretty heavy dudes, but also you're separated from all the pieces of shit that are in the boneyard.
Yeah, and that being the pedophiles, other offences that are frowned upon, dogs, police.
Snitches, people that have beaten up the elderly, whatever, just rapists, all that kind of stuff. Guys that are considered not worthy of being in a mainstream prison wing.
Yeah, and I think you're open enough to know that your experience is not the average. Yeah, everyone's got different experiences going into prison. You've gone in there and come out, survived it, and not traumatised by it, and it was worked for you. But there are other people in there that have hard experiences, and just with the buy-up, people explain if this, because you're only recently out of prison too, aren't we? We're not talking a long time.
Yeah, I got released in October 2021.
Yeah. So with the buy-up, I think it's $150 a week that people are allowed to put into your buy-up fund.
Only, they can put up to $150 a week into your prison account, but you can only spend $100 a week on buy-up food.
Okay.
And then the rest you can put into your phone account or go towards the activity buy-up, which is monthly, and that's kind of things like clothes. You can buy a TV if you're going to be in there long enough. You can, things like decks of cards, all that kind of stuff are on the activity buy-up.
And again, we talk about the support that you have outside is important when you're released. When you're in there, that support makes life a little bit easier too, doesn't it? If you've had that.
Absolutely. If I had family that were putting money into my prison account so that I could get buy-ups every week, and then you share that with a few guys, and that generates goodwill. I always got one of my creature comforts every week was just the Nescafe Blend 43, which was like the most expensive coffee they had on the list. But so sometimes I'd be sitting around so sometimes I'd have like the prison council, everyone sitting there with a nice, we'd all go for a nice quick Nescafe and a team meeting, and it was nice of me to share that around. So, that usually went pretty quickly. Yeah. But yes, those kind of things make a huge difference, both in terms of your own well-being and but also just being able to generate some friendships in there. Being able to share a few things can go a long way.
Well, to be able to share a little bit of humanity, I think, is important. You need that humanity.
Guys have so little in there so that, when someone's sharing something, it's a big deal.
Yeah. Because I would imagine you go in there and you'd have that shield up that you're a tough guy, blah, blah, blah. You're not going to let your guard down. But that creates more problems than it fixes. So there is that. So you felt like there was some genuine support by blokes in there. And mateship, I suppose. Most
of the guys that I spent time with were very genuine blokes, and the guys that are out, I still chat regularly with now. Yeah. Unfortunately, the guy Clark, who I was closest to, he got bail and he took his own life. And
that's sad.
Was pretty hard to cop, but. The rest of the guys that are out, some of them are already back inside, but the other guys, I still chat to regularly, and so I've made some pretty good friendships in there. It was funny when I was at Long Bay, this guy came up to me and he was like, "Mate, I fucking know you from somewhere." And I have one of those faces that looks like a bunch of other people's, and that wasn't really a good thing in prison because you don't want to be mistaken for someone who's rubbed someone the wrong way. Yeah. But this guy's like, no, I fucking know you. He's like, mate, you used to buy me and my missus beers whenever you won money on the pokies at the Columbian. And
right, is
and
that where you used to drink?
yeah. So this guy was very well connected at Long Bay, and next thing you know, I got hooked up with a sandwich press, and was like, in very good stead in the yard, all because of my old gambling addiction. Ended up being quite a blessing in disguise at Long Bay Jail.
That gave you some street cred.
Yeah. So, it didn't pay off in a financial point of view, but in terms of just some perks in the prison yard at Long Bay Hospital, it was very handy.
I heard another story, and you don't say where'd you find that out. You're making me feel like a stalker. But a cellmate that when you came into the cell, only one rule. And that non-negotiable rule was we watch Home and Away every night on the TV. Yeah. Talk us through that. Because this is not the scene you expect in a prison.
I mean, so many guys, that was one of the ludicrous, was just so many guys in prison watch Home and Away. And you realise it's because it's consistent. It's something to talk. It's something that it's just a sense of normality.
It's almost life outside their little.
It's just it's their thing. They watch that and they talk about it. And I found it weird. I was like, why would you watch this shit show? But I had a cellmate, this big fella who was like, mate, non-negotiable. We're watching Home and Away Monday to Thursday, and then for some reason Home and Away on Thursdays was like 90-minute episodes, and I'm like, because I was like, God, this episode's going for a long while, and he's like, yeah, triple episode on Thursdays. So I got out of that cell pretty quickly because he was just a TV hog. Didn't want to. You want to be in there with someone you get along with, and also it can make a big difference if you share the same interests on what to watch on television when you've only got one TV.
It takes me back to childhood. How you used to fight with your brothers and sisters on what show you could watch because you couldn't record anything.
Except an argument between two guys in a prison cell can get out of hand pretty quickly.
Yeah, a little bit different.
If two guys won't back down and they both want to watch different shows.
What show did you want to watch when Home and Away was on?
Gosh, I don't know. I liked watching a lot of the different game shows during the afternoon. I like to watch the news, and then by about 8:30 there was usually a couple of movies on.
Yeah. I can understand how it does pass the time of day if you're locked up there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So your court matter, explain how that's played out. Because you're in prison for 4 months. You did Parklea, Long Bay.
Yep.
And then you finally got
I got bail
application at the Supreme Court?
No, it was still at local because we had a couple of changes of circumstance. I got a different lawyer, and then for a little while the mushrooms got taken off. And so between those two things, we had enough to go back to local court for change of circumstances, and then I got granted bail there.
When you say, sorry, I'm just curious, when you say the mushroom charges got taken off?
Yeah, they got taken off temporarily because there was some kind of, fuck up at the lab that they were contaminated or something like that. Okay. They couldn't test them. But then, and so I was like, fuck, well, there goes my biggest charge. Great news. But then they're like, oh no, it's coming back. So, yes, but but it was enough to get me bail. So then I was granted bail, and I was under strict bail conditions. I was under house arrest at my parents' place. I could only leave the house if I was in the company of my mum or dad.
How old were you?
Well, this was 2 years ago, so I think I was 35, going on 36. I'm in house arrest, yeah.
Did that inhibit your lifestyle, going out with mum and dad
Well,
all the
not
time?
really, because my mum said, Andrew, if you ever want to go anywhere, just let us know. And I said, it's great you say that, Mum, because I've lined up a Tinder date. And so I went on a date, and I had to bring my parents along.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I assume that relationship's not still going?
No, not still going, but it did go longer than it probably should have. So I was like, you must have gone on some shit dates if you're agreeing to go out with me, and I've got to bring my parents along. And she goes, you've got no idea. So that's how low the bar is in dating. But yes.
Did your parents enjoy the date?
Well, it was at a pub, so they just sat at one end of the pub and gave us our space. So they weren't like sitting there right next to me, but it was still weird.
Yes, Andrew, it's very weird.
But then I also asked my mum if we could go to a comedy night, and so I signed up for on the night, open mic comedy night, and I had to ask the guys if I could go on early because I had a curfew. And so they were like, who the fuck is this guy? And I got on stage and started talking about jail, and they were like, they loved it. So yeah, I had a good experience my first time on stage, and continued to do that But luckily, soon after, we got my bail conditions changed so that I could go and work a day job.
Yep.
And so I was allowed out of the house without my parents, which made things a lot easier for me to go to comedy shows. But I just I had a 10 p.m. curfew,
Right.
so I always had to ask to go on early so I could race home in time. And then
Sorry, I'm just laughing. If someone just tuned into this conversation at this point in time, I was allowed to go out without my parents during the day.
Yeah, 36-year-old man finally got to go out without my parents chaperoning me.
And then
To go to open mic comedy nights. I'm like, what has my life become? But I loved it. So
Yeah.
I do these comedy shows, and then I'd always get home like just a few minutes before 10, and then the cops would come and do a bail check at about 10:30. And
Yep.
so luckily I always made it home in time. And I did that for many months before I got sentenced in July. And the whole time I was doing urine tests and working a day job. And so by the time we went to court for my sentencing, we had this collection of positive pieces around what I've been doing, because I've been doing alcohol and drug counselling every week. I'd done the clean urine tests, and I also had been doing stand-up comedy and working a day job. So between all these things, we wanted it to be a scenario where the judge was like, it's hard to justify putting me back in prison.
Why would you put him back in prison?
Yeah.
But it looks like you genuinely, and the judge acknowledged it, that you really bought into the whole thing. Okay, I've got to turn my life around. So full credit to you, because it's not easy. Like we joke about and laugh about it, but there's so many times you could have just tripped over and reverted back to the...
Absolutely. And the weird thing is, I say this all the time, I am happier now as a broke comedian living with my parents than I was as a wealthy drug dealer.
Yeah.
You know, I enjoy my life. I like who I am. I like the version of myself that I'm becoming every day. And I get so much fulfillment out of doing comedy that, I'm happy.
Yeah. Talking about that, did you find it, because I reckon it's one of the toughest gigs, and we spoke off mic about it, like the pressure on you in front of an audience. Yeah, they talk public speaking is one of the most traumatizing things people can do. How'd you find it?
The first time was a bit of a blur. I had the words of these jokes memorized, and I just said them. I didn't really perform them. But when you get a laugh the first time, it just, this relief washes over you, and you're like, thank God, okay.
I've got something.
I've got something, yeah. And then I think the second time I had a false sense of confidence because of the first time, and then I ate shit. But you just, the more you do it, like it's like a muscle. I do it every night.
Talk us through that, where the second time crashed and burned. Is it just this deafening silence?
Sometimes it can be deafening silence, and then you suddenly feel the beads of sweat. You're like, fuck. But then you'll hear a couple of like little laughs, but you're not thinking like, oh, I'm doing really well. There's a huge difference between when you've got the room on fire and everyone's laughing their head off, and just a couple of people giggling mainly out of politeness or nervousness than out of anything funny you're saying.
Awkward.
Yeah. So, you learn from those kind of things and get better. And so, now I've done hundreds of gigs, and I find my strike rate's much better now. Thank God.
Well, because you have a Melbourne Comedy Festival, and you've got some in Sydney, and so how many gigs have you done now?
Oh, it'd be over 300.
Okay, well, seasoned veteran.
Yeah.
The NRL players get recognised for 100 games.
That's right.
300 shows.
Yeah, over 300 easily. And I find I get incrementally better, I hope, every time I do it. And I think it'll be interesting to see what I find to talk about after I talk about my time in prison, because that's the thing I've chosen to speak about now, because it's the most interesting thing that I had to talk about, and I had so many jokes about it that came out of my life lived experience. But I guess that's what I'll figure out next.
Yeah. So you look at the show evolving and looking at you seem to have a quirky view on life, and you can laugh about yourself, which I think is good. So you're looking at other areas where you're seeing humour and.
I try to. I mean, I just the ideas haven't come quite as quickly as they have around my previous life with selling mushrooms, and also with getting arrested and going to prison. So I think once I've finished doing this show, which is all about that, then that's why I wanted to do it so quickly, was because I felt I had so much passion and feeling around what I was saying, that I wanted to do a show about it just so I could get that out of the way. I thought it'd be quite cathartic, and then figure out where I want to go from there.
How do you market your show? Like, what's the title of your show?
So the show is called Jokes About the Time I Went to Prison, because I thought I don't like these guys, comedians that you've never heard of before, right?
It's you're not abstract thinking there.
No, not at all. I want to give people exactly what they see on the box, because if you're a comedian no one's ever heard of, and you've got like a one-word show named like Brick or something like that, people are like, well, what the hell is that? So I thought, let's just name it something super obvious, so that people will be interested or not interested immediately. They're not going to be halfway through the show and go, what the hell, this show's about prison. I don't want to see this.
Is talking about what sort of audience do you attract?
My audience on social media that sometimes have come to the shows has been largely like either ex-crims, current crims, bikies, or prison officers. I've had quite a few correctional officers come, and some cops. Actually, when I was doing the Melbourne Comedy Festival recently, on the way out, a guy came past me and he goes, "Great show," and then he whispered, he goes, "I work dog squad." So that was funny. I mean, with a show called Jokes About the Time I Went to Prison, obviously it's going to attract those people. But other than that, it seems to be a mix of people from all walks of life, really, that are attracted to it. I think,
it is a fascination people have. And if you can put a different slant on it too, like being able to laugh at the situation, I can see why people are enjoying it.
Well, the jokes I do about the Raptor Squad raiding my house, I mean, it's just there's no one else that's going to be doing material about that. So I
can't wait to Raptor Squad listen to this and and raid your show.
So it's hopefully they come see it. They'll be like, oh, I was the one that told him he had a tiny cock.
That is funny, but you haven't denied it the whole time we've been talking.
I have a joke about that where I say, that for context, I used to be a lot fatter. There's nothing quite like a bit of Raptor Squad fat shaming to help you lose weight. And also, I used to have a much smaller penis.
You got to laugh. You have got to laugh. You're also podcasting.
Yes.
Now, this podcast, as you know, it's plastered all around the wall. I catch killers.
Mm-hmm.
That's because I was a homicide detective for a long time.
Yes.
Your podcast?
It's called Shit's Gone Sideways.
Why?
Because my life went sideways and then I recovered from it. And so I chat to people whose lives have gone to shit and then how they grew from it. So I talk to people from all walks of life. I've had a lot of guys that have done prison time that have now changed their lives come on. I had guys that you've had on like John Killick and Jeff Morgan and Russell Manser and Graham Henry. But I've also talked to people who have fallen into a coma, had organ transplants, and how that's changed their life, or people from religious backgrounds that have kind of been cut off from all their family connections when they've left their religion, all those kinds of things. It's a real mix of any people who have hit a crisis point in their life and then change from it, because that's something which was trying to think of a podcast topic that rang true to me, and that was one that I came up with, and so I have a lot of fun doing it and sharing people's stories.
It's interesting sharing stories, isn't it? Like I've now been doing the podcast for a while and getting a sense of it, and I've had to listen to your podcast, and it's great. It's I like the way you're chatting with people, and someone like John Killick. I stayed friends with John. I catch up with him a bit, and people that don't know John Killick, he escaped from civil war to prison in a helicopter with his Russian girlfriend.
Yep, like at gunpoint in 1999. Amazing. Yeah,
it's a classic. I always laugh when I talk to John about that. And again, we shouldn't be laughing about these type of things, but
it kind of. I mean, it's just so ballsy. It's like the wildest prison escape in Australian history. Surely, yeah.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. It's the stuff of movies and legends. So, John Killick, if you don't know the name, that's the bloke that escaped in the helicopter with his Russian girlfriend at gunpoint. Yeah, amazing. Did you ever consider escaping?
No.
You liked it too much, didn't you?
Yeah, I was pretty comfortable in there. So no, I mean, I always wondered that when people escape, like, it just seems like the chances of you getting away long term are so slim.
Yeah.
That what's the point? I mean, obviously there was that famous story recently of that guy named, was it Desic Darko?
Oh, on the Northern Beaches.
that
Yeah.
handed himself back in because his life turned to shit when he was during COVID because he
Yeah.
couldn't get any cash in hand jobs. So he was like, "Oh, things will be better in prison."
Yeah,
Right?
what had they? He ended up. They wanted him to do time again, but I think that something was overruled. He didn't go back in
I can't remember. He might have done a little bit of time
Yeah.
time for a
because the
few
community
months,
really
but
supported him.
that yeah, but they were trying to deport him as well back
That's
to
right.
Yugoslavia or something, a country that
Yeah.
doesn't even exist anymore. So I think there was a petition signed, and they ended up giving him permanent residency.
Yeah.
So yes, it's ended up working out well for him. But that's just goes to show. I mean, that was just an example of a guy who did escape and managed to stay out of the radar for a couple of decades.
Yeah,
But most guys get caught. John was on the run for 40 days or something like that before he got caught.
and then did some tough time after that.
That's
'Cause,
right.
he humiliated corrective services. It's interesting speaking to John how much prisons have changed, and the brutality of what it was in the old days. Like it's
Different world.
Yeah. I
You've
don't
talked
think
to-
you would have got away with posting the prison meal reviews.
Not at all. You speak to any of the old crims, they've all got horror stories of just the way things were back there. It sounds like it was a very brutal world in prison. I mean, it still is brutal, but I found that there's also just a lot of reasonable guys in most mainstream prison
Yeah.
wings as well.
Is there looking at it? Is there anything that you would do to improve prison? And I'm not talking about the meals here, just in a general sense. What your sense of it?
Well, I mean, from my short experience at Parklea and Long Bay, I found private prisons to be an absolute piece of shit. Long Bay is like just run down
From the 1800s.
crumbling,
Yeah.
like cockroach infested place. But at least the guards genuinely seem to listen and try and help you if you
Yeah.
ask for it.
Okay.
I got a Ventolin on my first day there, and there was just such a difference between a private prison and a public prison from my experience.
We've had a couple of corrective services officers on the show here, and I got to admit they really impressed me, the depth of it, and you've seen that they're the people that when you're inside, but sitting down speaking to them, a good corrective services officer can make a world of difference.
A good one, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a shame there aren't more. I think I found there was way more at Long Bay in a public prison than a private prison.
Okay.
But you certainly come across these heroes that obviously got bullied as a kid, that just took the job for a position of power, that have no interest in helping anyone. There's plenty of those as well.
It's the wrong attitude, and it doesn't achieve anything, does it?
No.
It just makes
And
it
that's
worse,
why,
if anything.
I mean, I was there when the riot happened at Parklea Prison,
Yeah.
right? And the reason why that happened was because the culture that they'd created was just so unconstructive towards the inmates that it was a powder keg.
Because we haven't talked about that, but it is always a simmering powder keg in.
These wings, it was. They didn't have enough phones. There was too many guys. The phones, two of the phones were broken, and that just adds
To the
animosity.
tension.
That adds to the tension. There's all this false information on the walls about when guys can go to the chapel or to the Oval, and it turns out, because I'd ask questions, they'd say you never go in these certain wings.
Yeah.
You got to get to a gold wing by just not fucking up. But there was just so much tension in some of these wings that was created by the prison, right? They could do a million things about it, because you go to another wing and it'll be way better.
Yeah.
So it was when that riot happened, I was like, no shit, because they'd created this environment which was just ready to explode at any moment.
Was that concerning when you're in there when the riot's going on?
Oh, no, because I mean, I was in
They-
a separate wing. I was spectating it and thought it was very entertaining. First thing you know, we saw a few guys on
Have
the
you
roof.
ever seen the movie Monty Python? Always look on the bright side of life.
It was concerning.
You're in a prison riot. Haven't you seen that on TV? You're watching your TV.
Yeah,
in
that's supposed to be
yourselves.
scary, but when you're on the inmate side, it's not so scary. Maybe I would have been scared if I was a guard, but when it's a prison riot and you're on Team Green. But we got locked away, and the next thing you know, I could see the smoke coming out, and it was spreading. And I'm like, okay, maybe this is bad because
How about you get a little bit concerned?
Yeah, when the smoke started to spread, I'm like, okay, maybe this is becoming a problem. But then we turned the TV on, and there was helicopters above us, and we could see the guys that we all recognised on the roof.
Were you waving?
It was just it was chaos. But again, it felt like it could have been easily avoided if the prison had done more. Yeah. I know I got locked away for 3 days because I had a cold, and I asked the nurses for a Panadol.
Yeah.
And so, because I said I had a cold, they locked us away, me and my cellmate, for 3 days pending a COVID test. And my cellmate was so pissed off with me because he was like, don't say anything, say anything. But I had this throbbing headache, and I just wanted a Panadol. And so we got locked away for 3 days. And every day I just needed some Panadol.
Yeah.
Never got a Panadol. And so, I was just feeling like absolute shit. No medical care provided. And then after 3 days of when we tested negative, when I was negative, we got let out. And then I remember one of the inmates came up to me and goes, mate, don't ever ask the guards for help. They'll never help you. If you need help, ask the inmates. Yeah. And that was just so telling. Not right, that's the way it is at Park Lee. You can't get any help from the actual prison.
Yeah, that's going to create problems, obviously. Well, I think probably finishing on the prison riot scene might be a good time to wrap this up, and the fact that you find joy in prison riots. Weirdo. Look, I've really enjoyed chatting with you. All the best for the future, and a shout out to your shows and the podcasts that you're doing.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, it's still I say it on stage all the time, but it still spins me out that I never would have done stand-up comedy if I didn't go to prison, and it's completely changed my life. So it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, and hopefully I'll see some of your listeners at a show sometime.
Yeah, and we love positive stories, and you've turned a negative situation around to a positive. So good on you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Cheers.